She walked in looking like nothing, dirty clothes, worn-out shoes, and a face that had seen too many cold nights. Eleanor DuPont, billionaire owner of Veronique, the very fashion empire she built from the ground up, was about to put her company to the ultimate test. But the snobby saleswoman at the front, she didn't see wealth, power, or legacy, just another nobody to toss back onto the streets. With a smug smirk, she humiliated Eleanor, mocking her, throwing her out like trash. What happened next? She never saw coming. The truth, the power shift, the brutal reckoning. Oh, it was about to change everything. Before we start, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got a special surprise you won't want to miss. The woman moved through the bustling city streets, her steps slow but deliberate. Her oversized coat, frayed at the edges, swallowed her small frame, and her tattered shoes scraped against the pavement. She ignored the passing stares, the judgmental glances, the way pedestrians instinctively stepped away as if she carried a contagious disease. The towering luxury storefronts glowed under the early afternoon sun, their window displays showcasing elegant gowns, polished handbags, and shoes that cost more than most people's rent. She stopped in front of one of the largest stores on the block, Veronique, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and untouchable elegance. The glass windows stretched high, revealing a gleaming interior where sales associates dressed in black floated around their high-paying customers. The entire place dripped with exclusivity, meant only for those who could afford the price tag. She peered inside, her tired eyes scanning the grand showroom. Ornate chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting off pristine marble floors. Mannequins draped in handcrafted pieces stood like statues, each one more stunning than the last. The woman lingered at the entrance, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her expression unreadable. Inside, a sales associate, tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed, glanced toward the entrance and curled her lip in disgust. Madison, she had spent years perfecting the art of identifying who belonged and who didn't, and this woman, she was the definition of someone who didn't. Madison's heels clicked sharply as she strode toward the front of the store, her perfectly manicured fingers adjusting the name tag pinned to her silk blouse. The second the glass doors slid open, the scent of expensive perfume filled the woman's nose. She stepped inside, the warmth of the store a stark contrast to the cold world outside. The movement was small, hesitant, but it was enough for Madison's trained eye to react. "Excuse me," Madison said, her tone sharp. The woman turned her head, meeting her gaze with calm, steady eyes. "Can I help you?" The words dripped with skepticism, like she already knew the answer. The woman took a slow breath, letting her gaze wander across the store. "Just looking," she said, her voice raspy but firm. Madison's smile was tight, fake, the kind reserved for those who weren't welcome. "I'm sorry, but we have a very exclusive clientele," she said, her eyes flicking over the woman's ragged clothing. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere else." The woman remained silent, her gaze drifting toward a shimmering evening gown displayed on a nearby mannequin. She took a step forward. Madison stepped in front of her. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." A few nearby customers turned their heads, whispering. A chuckle escaped a young man by the register. The woman exhaled slowly, tilting her head as if considering her next move. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. Madison rolled her eyes and scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Some people don't know their place," she muttered to a co-worker. Outside, the woman paused, pulling a small, worn notebook from her pocket. She clicked open a pen and, in neat, precise handwriting, wrote 3 words. "No compassion. Changes needed." A sleek black car pulled up beside her. She slid inside, shutting the door as the vehicle glided away, leaving behind a store full of people who had no idea what was coming. The morning air buzzed with anticipation inside Veronique's flagship store. Employees straightened racks, adjusted displays, and whispered among themselves, their nerves on edge. The whispers had started early. Corporate was sending someone for a surprise visit, a high-level executive. maybe even the CEO herself. Madison smirked as she applied a fresh coat of lipstick in the employee lounge. She wasn't worried. She was one of the top sales associates, always bringing in the highest commissions. She knew how to handle VIP clients, how to make the right people feel important. That was what mattered in a store like this, knowing who deserved attention. The usual morning rush had already begun. A wealthy couple browsed the jewelry section, while a group of influencers gushed over the newest designer bags. Madison adjusted her posture, prepared to greet the next high-profile customer. Then the glass doors swung open. The sound of heels echoed against the marble floors as a woman entered, her presence commanding, undeniable. She wasn't wearing rags this time. No, this time she was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, her silk blouse crisp, her jewelry understated yet expensive. She carried herself with effortless grace, the kind that made people step aside without even realizing why. But it wasn't just her clothing that sent a chill down Madison's spine. It was her face, the same woman she had thrown out yesterday. Madison's stomach flipped. Her polished mask faltered for a split second before she caught herself, forcing a tight-lipped smile. She glanced at her co-workers, expecting confusion, but their expressions told her they already knew who this woman was. Eleanor DuPont, the billionaire, the owner. Madison's throat went dry. Eleanor's sharp gaze swept across the store, taking in every inch of her empire with a quiet intensity. The employees stood frozen, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then, without raising her voice, she spoke. "Everyone, sales floor, now." The words were calm, steady, yet they sent a ripple of panic through the room. Employees scrambled to line up, their polished appearances now masking an undercurrent of dread. Madison's pulse pounded in her ears. She forced herself to move, stepping into formation with the others, her hands clasped in front of her. Eleanor took her time, pacing slowly in front of them, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smooth, almost casual. "I came here yesterday." She turned slightly, locking eyes with Madison. "I walked through those doors, just like any other customer." The silence was suffocating, and I was thrown out. A nervous shuffle passed through the staff. Someone swallowed audibly. Madison's breathing shallowed, her mind racing for an excuse, an explanation, anything that could undo what had already been done. Eleanor's gaze remained cold, unwavering. "So tell me," she continued, "how many others have been treated the same way?" No one dared to answer. The silence in the store was thick, suffocating. No one spoke, no one moved. Madison stood rigid, her palms damp, her heart hammering in her chest. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on her, cool and assessing, but there was no visible anger, just a sharp, quiet disappointment that felt far worse. The other employees shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to be the one to break the silence, to answer the question that lingered in the air. How many others had been turned away? How many people, like Eleanor in disguise, had been dismissed without a second thought? Eleanor took a step forward, the click of her designer heels echoing through the showroom. "This company was built on the belief that fashion is an experience," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. "Not just for the wealthy, not just for the powerful, but for everyone who walks through those doors." She turned her attention to a middle-aged woman near the register, one of the more experienced employees. "Linda," Eleanor said, addressing her by name. "How long have you been with Veronique?" Linda swallowed hard. 15 years, ma'am." Eleanor nodded. "And in those 15 years, have you seen this kind of treatment before?" Linda hesitated. Madison shot her a sharp glance, but the older woman didn't meet her eyes. Instead, after a moment, she gave a small nod. "Yes," she admitted. "It happens." A murmur swept through the staff. Some looked guilty, others simply uncomfortable. Madison clenched her jaw. Eleanor let the weight of Linda's words settle before she spoke again. "I started this company with a single boutique," she said, pacing slowly. "I was 19. I sewed the first collection myself. I slept on the floor of my store because I couldn't afford an apartment." She stopped, letting her gaze drift across the room. "I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be invisible." Her words struck deep. Some employees lowered their Heads. Madison forced herself to keep her chin high, though the confidence she once carried felt fragile now. I never wanted Veronique to become a place where people were judged by what they wear, Eleanor continued. Yet yesterday I was, not just by one person, but by an entire culture that has been allowed to fester. She turned back to the staff. So now, I need to ask myself, how do we fix this? The tension in the room shifted. Some of the employees looked relieved, others apprehensive. Madison swallowed, sensing that her moment of reckoning was inching. Effective immediately, we will be reviewing our entire approach to customer service. Training will be mandatory. Policies will change. She paused, her eyes landing on Madison once more. But before we move forward, I need to address something else. The air turned ice cold. Madison, Eleanor said, her voice sharp. Step forward. Madison's stomach twisted into knots. She had nowhere to run. Madison's feet felt like they were made of stone. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to stay put, to disappear into the background. But Eleanor's piercing gaze made it clear there was no escape. Slowly, she stepped forward, her stomach twisting into knots. The room felt smaller now, suffocating under the weight of the moment. Eleanor didn't speak right away. She let the silence stretch, measuring Madison's reaction. The rest of the staff stood frozen, watching with a mix of curiosity and unease. Madison forced herself to lift her chin, but the confidence she had worn so effortlessly before was cracking. Tell me, Eleanor said, her voice even, controlled. What was it about me that made you decide I wasn't worth your time? Madison's mouth went dry. She knew what Eleanor was asking. It wasn't just about her. It was about the culture she had contributed to, the unspoken rules she had followed so well. She could feel the weight of every decision she had made in that store, pressing down on her. Madison started, her voice weaker than she wanted it to be. She swallowed hard and tried again. I didn't know who you were. Eleanor's expression didn't change. And if I wasn't who I am? She asked. If I were just another person on the street, would that have made it okay? Madison felt a lump form in her throat. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers, boring into her. The answer was obvious, but saying it aloud felt like stepping off a ledge. No, she admitted. Eleanor nodded slowly, as if she had already known the answer, but needed Madison to say it herself. She exhaled, glancing around the room before speaking again. This isn't just about one mistake. This is about a mindset that has been allowed to grow in this store, in this company, and it stops today. Madison's pulse spiked. Was she about to be fired? Right here in front of everyone? Eleanor took a step closer. I want to believe people can change, she said, that they can learn. But the question is, do you want to? The challenge in her voice was undeniable. Madison's pride screamed at her to defend herself, to argue that she was only doing her job, that this was how high-end retail worked. But deep down, she knew those excuses wouldn't mean anything to Eleanor. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I do, she said, though the words felt fragile, uncertain. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Then she turned to the rest of the employees. There will be changes coming, she announced. New policies, new training. This will not be the same store it was yesterday. She turned back to Madison. As for you, I haven't made my decision yet. Madison's stomach clenched. The uncertainty was worse than anything she had expected. Eleanor gave her one last, unreadable look before walking away, leaving Madison standing alone, her fate hanging in the balance. Madison felt the weight of the room pressing down on her. The moment Eleanor turned away, the air shifted, whispers, barely concealed, eyes darting toward her before quickly looking away. She wanted to disappear, to undo the last 24 hours, to make a different choice, but it was too late for that. Eleanor's words echoed in her head. As for you, I haven't made my decision yet. Her fate was suspended in uncertainty, and for the first time in her career, Madison wasn't in control. She forced herself to move, stepping back in line with the other employees, but she could feel the tension, thick between them. No one wanted to get too close, to be associated with her now. Just yesterday, she had held her place at the top of the sales team, admired for her ability to close deals with high-profile clients. Now, she was radioactive. Eleanor, meanwhile, continued walking the showroom floor, her eyes scanning every detail with fresh scrutiny. Every misplaced hanger, every slight imperfection in the displays seemed to hold new meaning. She wasn't just here to reprimand. She was here to dismantle everything that had allowed this culture to take root. She turned back to the employees, her expression unreadable. "Starting today, we are implementing new policies," she announced. "Effective immediately, customer interactions will be evaluated. Every person who walks through these doors will be treated with respect, regardless of what they look like." A murmur swept through the staff, some nodding in silent agreement, others stealing quick glances at Madison. She felt her face burn. "There will be mandatory training on empathy and customer service, and we will be revising our hiring practices to ensure we are bringing in people who reflect the values this company was built on." Madison's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about her. Eleanor was overhauling everything. Eleanor paused, her gaze locking onto Madison once more. "But before we move forward, let me ask you this." She folded her arms. "What do you think should happen to you?" The question hit like a slap. Madison felt the eyes of every employee on her, waiting for her answer. There was no easy way out of this. Her throat tightened. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice quieter than she wanted it to be. "I know I messed up." Eleanor tilted her head, considering. "You didn't just mess up. You made a choice to judge someone based on nothing but appearances." Madison swallowed hard. "I believe in accountability," Eleanor continued. "I also believe people can change. The question is, do you deserve that chance?" Madison didn't know how to answer. Because, for the first time, she wasn't sure if she did. Eleanor studied her a moment longer before turning away. "I'll let you know my decision soon." And just like that, Madison's world remained on the edge of a knife, uncertain and unraveling. Madison sat in the break room, her hands clenched into fists on the cold tabletop. The tension in her chest refused to loosen, like a knot pulled too tight. She could still hear Eleanor's voice, still feel the weight of that question. Do you deserve that chance? For the first time in her life, Madison didn't have an answer. The room was empty except for Linda, who stood near the counter stirring a cup of tea. The silence between them stretched, but Madison could feel the older woman's gaze flick toward her every so often. She had always thought Linda was too soft, too sentimental for a place like Veronique, but right now, she envied her calm presence. "You look like you're about to be sick," Linda finally said, setting her mug down. Madison exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I don't know what's going to happen," she admitted. The words felt foreign in her mouth. Uncertainty wasn't something she was used to. Linda sat across from her, folding her hands neatly on the table. "You should have thought about that yesterday." The bluntness of it stung, but Madison didn't argue. She had no defense. "I didn't think it mattered," she muttered after a moment, staring at the floor. "I mean, we work in high fashion. It's always been about exclusivity." "That's the whole point," Linda sighed, shaking her head. "That's what you told yourself, so you wouldn't have to feel guilty." Madison looked up sharply. "That's not..." But she stopped. "Because wasn't it?" Linda studied her for a moment. "I've been here a long time," she said finally. "Long enough to see how this place changed. It wasn't always like this. Eleanor built it for people who love fashion, not just for people who can afford it. Somewhere along the way, that got lost." Madison stayed silent, letting the words sink in. Linda leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea. "People like you made it worse," she continued. "Not because you're a bad person, but because you never stopped to question it." Madison swallowed hard. She wanted to snap back, to defend herself, but there was nothing to say. The door to the break room swung open, and one of the other associates peeked inside. "Eleanor's calling everyone back to the floor," she said, glancing at Madison. "She's making her decision." Madison's stomach lurched. She stood up too fast, her knees nearly buckling beneath her. Linda didn't say anything as she followed her out. The showroom was filled with nervous energy. Eleanor stood at the center, her presence a steady force in the chaos. The employees lined up once more, waiting, Eleanor's gaze settled on Madison. "This company is changing," she said, "and you need to decide if you're going to be a part of that." Madison's breath caught, because as of today, things will never be the same. Madison stood frozen as Eleanor's words settled over the room. The other employees held their breath, their eyes shifting between the billionaire and the woman who had until now seemed untouchable in her position. Eleanor crossed her arms, waiting. The silence stretched long enough for Madison's pulse to thunder in her ears. "You have a choice," Eleanor said finally. "You can take responsibility for what you did, learn from it, and prove that you deserve to be here. Or," she let the word hang in the air, the weight of it unmistakable. Madison's mouth felt dry. Every instinct screamed at her to defend herself, to explain, to justify, but there was no excuse that would make this right. She swallowed hard. "I want to make it right," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. She hesitated. "I didn't think about what I was doing. I did what I thought I was supposed to do." Eleanor tilted her head. "I thought exclusivity was part of the brand," she admitted, shame curling in her gut. "I thought keeping certain people out made the store feel more high-end." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you understand now why that thinking is a problem?" Madison forced herself to nod. "Yes." Eleanor studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Madison's heart pounded in the silence. "I'm giving you a chance," Eleanor finally said. "Not because I think you deserve it, but because I think you need to earn it." Madison's breath caught. She had been bracing for the worst, for immediate termination. Eleanor turned to the rest of the employees. "For the next 30 days, every single one of you will go through mandatory training. That includes not just customer service, but empathy, diversity, and understanding the values this company was built on." She looked back at Madison. "You will be first." Madison nodded stiffly, not daring to speak. Eleanor's voice didn't soften. "If I see any sign that you haven't changed, if you revert to the mindset that put you in this position," she let the implication hang, "you will be gone. No discussion, no second chances." Madison nodded again, slower this time. "I understand," Eleanor exhaled, glancing around the store. "This isn't just about Madison," she said to the others. "This is about all of us. This culture doesn't exist because of one person. It exists because it was allowed to exist." "That stops today." A murmur ran through the employees, some nodding, others looking uncertain. Madison's hands were clenched at her sides. Eleanor stepped back. "Training begins tomorrow," she said. "Make your decision by then. Either you're willing to change or you're not." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving the room charged with something unfamiliar. Change, uncertainty, and for Madison, a second chance she wasn't sure she deserved. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Veronique was tense. Employees trickled in, quieter than usual, eyes darting toward one another, as if trying to gauge who would stay and who might walk away. The weight of Eleanor's ultimatum lingered in every corner of the store. Change was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. Madison arrived early, something she rarely did. The usual confidence in her step was gone, replaced by unease. She had spent the night replaying Eleanor's words in her head, the shame of yesterday clinging to her like a second skin. Now, standing in the showroom before the first training session, she felt more exposed than ever. Linda was already there, sipping her usual cup of tea at the back of the room. She didn't say anything when Madison walked in, but there was no judgment in her eyes, just quiet observation. Eleanor entered moments later, a folder tucked under her arm. She wasn't dressed like the ruthless billionaire Madison had seen at the confrontation yesterday. Instead, she wore a simple, well-fitted sweater and slacks, her demeanor calmer, more measured, but the authority was still there, undeniable. "Let's begin," she said, setting the folder down on the counter. A corporate trainer had been brought in, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady voice. She wasted no time, launching into the first session on unconscious bias and customer experience. Madison sat stiffly, forcing herself to focus as the trainer explained how people made instant judgments, often unfairly, based on appearances. The room was silent, but the tension was palpable. Some employees shifted uncomfortably. Others, like Linda, listened intently. Madison, however, couldn't shake the feeling that this was directed squarely at her. Then the trainer asked a question that made her stomach turn. Think about a time you made a judgment about someone before speaking to them. What assumptions did you make? Were they correct? No one spoke, but Madison felt the heat rise in her face. She didn't need to think back far. Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. "We're not here to be comfortable," she said. "We're here to change." That was when Madison realized this wasn't just another corporate exercise. This wasn't some temporary PR stunt to smooth things over. Eleanor was serious. By the end of the session, Madison felt raw. The trainer had made them examine their actions, their biases, their role in shaping Veronique's toxic culture. Madison had never considered herself a bad person, but now she wasn't so sure. As the employees filed out, Madison lingered, unsure if she wanted to be alone or if she needed someone to tell her she wasn't the only one struggling. Linda passed, by pausing just long enough to say, "Figuring it out hurts. That's how you know you're actually doing it." Then she walked away, leaving Madison alone with the weight of everything she was just beginning to understand. The email came the next morning. Madison stared at the subject line, her stomach twisting. Final decision. Cold as she clicked it open, skimming past the formalities to the part that mattered. Effective immediately. Your employment with Veronique is terminated. The words hit like a punch to the gut. She read them again, hoping she had misunderstood, but they remained unchanged. Madison's breath came shallow. She had known this was a possibility, but after yesterday's training, after everything, she had thought, no, hoped, Eleanor might give her more time. Her fingers trembled over the trackpad. She wanted to close the email, delete it, pretend it wasn't real, but reality didn't work that way. A second email followed moments later, this one from Eleanor's personal assistant. "Eleanor would like to speak with you before you leave. 10 a.m., office upstairs." Madison's pulse spiked. This wasn't a conversation she wanted to have, but it wasn't like she had a choice. She forced herself to move, to stand, to breathe. The store was already awake with activity, employees exchanging quiet glances as she passed. They knew, of course they knew. Madison kept her head high, even as the shame burned through her. Upstairs, Eleanor's office was sleek, minimalist, overlooking the city skyline. She stood by the window, hands in the pockets of her tailored slacks, her reflection visible in the glass. She didn't turn when Madison entered. "Sit!" Madison obeyed, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. Eleanor finally faced her, eyes cool but not unkind. "I wanted you to hear it from me." Madison swallowed hard. "Why?" Eleanor studied her. "Because taking responsibility means facing the consequences." Madison clenched her hands in her lap. "I thought I was changing," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Eleanor exhaled, folding her arms. "You started to," she admitted. "But change isn't just about understanding where you went wrong. It's about proving that you can be better. And right now, I don't think you're there yet." Madison felt something crack inside her. She had braced herself for anger, for cold dismissal. But this hurt more. "So that's it?" she asked. Eleanor leaned against the desk, regarding her carefully. "For now," Madison frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means this door isn't permanently closed," Eleanor said. "But if you ever expect to walk through it again, you need to do more than sit through a training session. You need to prove that you actually understand why you're here." Madison didn't know what to say. Eleanor stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Take this time and figure out who you want to be, Madison. If you do, maybe we'll see each other again." Madison left the office with no job, no certainty, and the unsettling realization that for the first time in a long time, she had no idea what came next. The news spread quickly. By midday, everyone in the store knew Madison was gone. Some whispered, some shrugged, and a few even looked relieved. But no one was truly surprised. Eleanor had made it clear. Veronique was changing, and there was no room for people who refused to change with it. Eleanor stood in the center of the showroom, her arms crossed as she surveyed the store. The energy was different now. Uncertainty mixed with something else, something new, hope. She turned to Linda, who had been watching her from behind the register. "How's the team handling it?" Linda sighed, setting down a stack of neatly folded scarves. Mixed reactions. Some think Madison deserved it, others are worried about what's coming next. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "That's normal. People fear change." Linda gave her a small, knowing smile. "And you don't?" Eleanor let out a quiet breath. "I don't have the luxury of fear." The truth was, she had always known this. Moment would come. The company had grown beyond her, slipping into something she never intended. She had spent too long watching from a distance, assuming that Veronique still held the values she had built it on. Yesterday had proven otherwise. But now she had a chance to fix it. She stepped forward, addressing the gathered employees. "I know the last few days have been intense," she said, "and I know some of you may be wondering what's next." A few employees exchanged cautious glances, waiting. Eleanor continued, "This isn't just about one incident. This is about creating a culture where luxury doesn't mean exclusion, where service doesn't mean judgment, where fashion is about expression, not status." The words hung in the air for a moment before she continued. "That's why, effective immediately, we are implementing company-wide changes." She saw the slight tensing of shoulders, the apprehension of people bracing for the unknown. "The first step is new hiring practices," Eleanor said. "I don't just want people with sales experience. I want people with a passion for fashion, for creativity, for human connection. Second, we're launching a mentorship and scholarship program," she continued. "We will be offering opportunities to young designers and sales associates from all backgrounds, not just the ones who can afford fashion school or internships." Now, the murmurs were louder. Linda's eyes gleamed with quiet approval. "And finally," Eleanor said, "we will be revising our customer service policies. Training will continue, but more than that, I expect every single one of you to uphold the values of this company, not just when someone's watching, but every single day." She let the words settle before she added, "Anyone who doesn't agree with this vision is free to walk away." No one moved. Eleanor studied their faces, then gave a small nod. "Then let's build something better." The changes at Veronique didn't happen overnight. Transformation never did. But in the weeks that followed, the shift in culture was undeniable. The first sign was the way employees interacted with customers. Where there had once been silent evaluations, quick glances to determine if someone was worth their attention, there was now a conscious effort to engage with everyone who walked through the doors. No more instant dismissals, no more judgment. Eleanor made a point to visit the store regularly, something she hadn't done in years. She observed as employees adapted, some faster than others, but progress was clear. She even saw Linda training a new associate, patiently explaining how to read customers' needs rather than their clothing labels. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to test things for herself. She arrived without warning, dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed billionaire. She stepped inside, moving through the showroom unnoticed, until a young associate, a fresh hire from their new mentorship program, approached her with an easy, welcoming smile. "Welcome to Veronique," she said. "Can I help you find anything?" "Today?" Eleanor glanced at her name tag. Sophie, a name she didn't recognize. Someone new. Someone untouched by the old ways of the store. "I'm just looking," Eleanor said, watching closely. Sophie didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said warmly. "If you need anything, just let me know. No forced politeness, no hidden condescension. Just genuine open service." Eleanor felt something settle inside her. She continued browsing, watching how the rest of the staff interacted. A middle-aged woman in worn sneakers was getting the same attentive service as a young influencer trying on designer heels. A college student with a backpack slung over her shoulder was being shown fabric samples without a second glance at what she could afford. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. As she made her way to the exit, she spotted Linda near the register, tallying up sales. Their eyes met, and Linda gave a small, knowing nod. Eleanor returned it before stepping outside. The city bustled around her, just as it always had. But something felt different this time. Then she saw her, a woman, hesitant, uncertain, standing at the edge of the sidewalk, looking in through Veronique's grand windows. Her clothes were modest, her shoes scuffed, her hands tightening around the strap of a bag slung over her shoulder. Eleanor watched as Sophie approached the glass from the inside, her expression kind. She gestured for the woman to come in. The woman hesitated, just for a moment, then stepped forward, pushing the door open, and this time, no one stopped her. Eleanor stood outside Veronique, watching through the glass as the woman stepped hesitantly inside. She could see the way the woman's shoulders tensed, as if she expected rejection the moment she crossed the threshold. Sophie greeted her without hesitation, offering a warm smile, the same way she had done with Eleanor earlier. The woman nodded, glancing around the store like she didn't quite believe she was allowed to be there. Eleanor had seen that look before. Years ago, she had been that woman, walking into a store she couldn't afford, pretending she belonged, hoping no one would see through her. Back then, she had been ignored, dismissed, sometimes even escorted out when she lingered too long near something expensive. Now, standing outside her own empire, she watched as her store, the one she had built from nothing, finally lived up to what she had always wanted it to be. She exhaled slowly, letting herself take in the moment. The change hadn't been easy. There had been pushback, employees who had quit rather than adjust, long-time clients who had scoffed at the new direction. But Eleanor hadn't wavered. Luxury wasn't about exclusion. It never had been. She pulled out the small, worn notebook from her pocket, the same one she had written in the day Madison had thrown her out. Flipping to the last page, she read the words she had scrawled that night. No compassion. Changes needed. She let the words settle before she pulled out a pen and in neat, deliberate handwriting wrote beneath them and slipped it back into her coat. Inside, Sophie was now leading the woman toward a display, speaking animatedly about the craftsmanship of a particular piece. The woman's expression shifted, softening. Eleanor smiled, feeling something inside her finally settle. She turned and stepped away from the store, blending into the steady pulse of the city around her. There was nothing left for her to fix here. Her work was done.